Good afternoon, class. I thought we would do a brief review of some of the grammar that you were supposed to look at in the syntax section of your textbook for week 1. Some of this will be carried over to week 2. So that is sort of the reason why we're looking at some of this stuff now. We're going to be talking about the comma splice, the run-on sentence, the fragment, faulty parallelism, and appositives. Now, these terms really shouldn't be new to most of y'all. This should really just be a review, maybe from previous grammar sessions that you've had in other English classes. But we're going to look at some of these, look at what they mean, look at a couple practice examples, and then there are some practice exercises in your textbook that you can go through as you prepare for quiz 1, which will happen in a couple weeks. And you can, as you do some of those practice exercises in your textbook, if you want to know that if you're getting them right or if you're going in the right direction, you can always just email me your answers. Just tell me which page that you're getting your questions from and the actual number of the question, which would be helpful for me so I can look on my end to see if you are indeed getting these exercises right. In a lot of ways, the exercises in the textbook are optional. So if you find another decent website that deals with comma splices, run-ons, fragments, faulty parallelism, and appositives, you're more than welcome to use those as your study guides. But the exercises in your textbook will sort of be beneficial because they will be sort of the study guide that I will be using as we move forward. So with that in mind, you should be able to see on your screen, I hope, these terms and the definitions. So a comma splice occurs when two independent clauses, groups of words that can stand alone as sentences, are joined together by a comma. And I will give you an example of that here, as I will with all of these other terms momentarily. The run-on sentence occurs when two or more independent clauses are joined without punctuation or conjunctions. A fragments are usually sentences that are missing one or more of the elements that make a complete sentence. So it could be missing a subject, a verb, a complete thought, two of those elements, one of those elements, or all three of those elements. Faulty parallelism. As readers, we often correct faulty parallelism, a lack of parallel structure, intuitively because an unbalanced sentence sounds awkward and poorly constructed. Appositives is a word or a group of words that describes or renames a noun or a pronoun. Incorporating appositives into your writing is a useful way of combining sentences that are too short and choppy. So right there, comma splice, run-ons, fragments, faulty parallelism, and appositives will be a big part of your quiz 1. There's going to be some other grammatical elements as we go through, week 2, week 3, week 4, that type deal, that will also be part of quiz 1. And each week we will look at some of those grammatical concepts. So if we look at some practice, if we look at our first one here, and some of these sentences are actually coming from some of those exercises that, again, you can find on your syllabus. I'd give you some page numbers and the exercise numbers at the end of this lesson so you can go back and kind of review those if you don't want to go back through the syllabus. So some of these will probably look familiar because they are actually coming from our textbook. So if we look at our first one, it says, a friend is always willing to help, comma, friendship is invaluable. Well, this is a classic example of a comma splice. Why? Because if you look here, we have a comma in between two independent clauses. And a lot of times independent clauses means two complete sentences or a complete sentence if it's just one independent clause. So there's a couple ways that you can fix a comma splice. One is you can let the comma sort of be a sort of a flag for you, and you can, interject a fanboy. Now, some of you have probably heard of fanboys or correlating conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So you want to fit the right one that sort of connects this sentence together. So you could say, comma, and friendship is invaluable. That would be one way that you can correct a sentence. You could also use just a basic period and capitalize the next word that starts the new sentence. That's method 2. Method 3 is that you can use a semicolon, which here, because of my font, let me get out of this font here for a minute so you can see that. You can use a semicolon, and then you just have to lowercase friendship. You can also use a coordinating or a conjunctive adverb or a transitional word. And there's a certain way that you can style this. If you use one in the middle of the sentence, which we would have to use here, you'd have to use a semicolon first, that conjunctive adverb. In this case, I'm using moreover because it's a synonym to and, my fanboy, and a comma. The best way that you could do as far as looking up how many coordinating conjunctions or subordinating conjunctions is to do a list of them on Google, because your book's going to mention or provide you with some of them, but it's not going to provide you with all of the list that's out there. So that's really 4 ways you can fix a comma splice. And what I would suggest early on is picking one that you can master first, right? And then you can kind of spice it up a little bit. After you start mastering one way, you can start looking at the other, maybe the other 3 methods to help you out with your writing. So if it's a comma and a fanboy, then I would go with that, because again, ultimately your goal on quiz 1 is to get that 100. You're not going to have time to be really experimenting with a lot of stuff because the quiz will be timed. You will have 30 minutes to do the quiz. So you want to pick a method that you sort of know like the back of your hand. If we look at our next sentence, because I was sick on my bed and I decided I would lie on the sofa and watch television. Here we have a classic example of a fragment, because we're beginning with a conjunctive adverb here with because. Because I was sick on my bed and decided I would lie on the sofa and watch television. The deal is this is a dependent clause, which a lot of times when you hear the word dependent, it means it's a fragment. So we need an independent clause or a complete sentence to really complete this entire thought process that's going on in this sentence. So what you can do is put a comma, because usually when you have a dependent clause, there's going to be a comma if you're beginning your sentence with a dependent clause. So now we just need to sort of come up with a complete sentence that would make this one make sense. So because I was sick on my bed and decided I would lie on the sofa and watch television, I eventually fell asleep. There you have a complete sentence, because you're adding a independent clause to the already dependent clause to turn your fragment into a complete sentence. Now you could come up with any kind of sentence there. Just make sure that it makes sense and it has a subject, verb, and a complete thought. If we look at our next one, it's really a classic example of a run-on sentence, because there's no punctuation until the end. But really what's going on is we have 2 complete sentences sort of smashed together. So the accident closed both lanes of traffic. We waited an hour for the wreckage to be clear. So if you say that sentence out loud like I just did, generally you can kind of tell where one sentence ends and one sentence begins. So this is where the first sentence ends at traffic. And really our next sentence begins with we. So if you remember the 4 different methods of how to correct a comma splice, they sort of work the same with your run-on sentence. So in this case, you could easily just say period and capitalize the W. That could be one way that you could correct a run-on. You could do a semicolon and lowercase the W and we. You can do a fanboy, comma, and lowercase the W and we waited, and you can also use one of those conjunctive adverbs. So again, I would probably pick a method that you sort of know like the back of your hand and use it for a run-on as well. If you look, and again, I'm going to have to change my font here because it's not picking up my semicolon so much. And let me go ahead and just change the font on this one. And maybe blow it up. Here, it says several students had the right answers, semicolon, however, comma, most of them failed the exam. Well, in this case, the writer is using a conjunctive adverb in the middle of the sentence, and they have it punctuated correctly. They have the semicolon before, however, and they have the comma after. So in this case, this particular sentence is correct as is. So you may have some correct sentences when you take quiz 1 here in a few weeks. And if you do have correct sentences, don't correct them. Because if you change them, chances are you're going to go into a mistake. Sometimes you're going to cause yourself to have a fragment or a run-on or a comma splice when you didn't need to change anything in that particular sentence. If we look at our next sentence, we are really dealing with faulty parallelism here, because it says Mr. Holloway enjoys reading and to play his guitar on weekends. The issue is, if you look, we have reading with an ing, but then we have to play, right? So since we begin with this ing, what they also call a present participle, we really need to get rid of our infinitive here, to play. So we need to get rid of to, and then we need to really make this into a present participle by just simply adding ing, because now it's parallel. Mr. Holloway enjoys reading and playing his guitar on weekends. That's all you would have to do with that particular faulty parallelism in this sentence. If we look at our next sentence, it's also dealing with faulty parallelism, but using as and then, right? When to use them correctly. And if you look, it says Kim's opponent was as tall as Jim's, and he carried far more weight. And really what's missing here is than Jim or than Kim did. We have to add that extra part, than Kim did, because really we're talking about Jim and he carried far more weight than his opponent, and his opponent in this case is Kim. Sometimes when you're using your grammar check on Microsoft Word, it's really good about picking up fragments, run-ons, and comma splices for the most part. It's only a computer program, so it's not going to catch everything. In a lot of ways, the spell check and the grammar check on your Microsoft Word is only as good as the person behind it running it, which would be you. So I wouldn't necessarily use spell check and grammar check. Obviously, it is a good tool. It will help. But again, it is a computer program. It's not as smart to pick up on every grammatical issue. So that's why it's good to, proofread your own work, read through it out loud, send me or Smart Thinking multiple drafts, just in case your eyes doesn't catch all of your mistakes. The next sentence is a classic example of how to use or when to use maybe a positive by combining two sentences and making them into one. So it says here, baby sharks are called pups. Pups can be born in one of three ways. So in this particular sentence, you may have to rewrite it to make it really make sense to you. And there's a couple ways that you can rewrite this one. You could say, baby sharks, which are also called pups. And notice how I have a comma before which, and I'm also going to have a comma after pups. And then I'm just going to basically omit pups in the next sentence and just pick up can be born in one of three ways. So that's one way that you can use a positive in this particular sentence to combine two sentences because the information in both really need to be together as one and not necessarily separate as two. So that's one way that you can use a positive, especially, you know, when you're writing that first essay. Our next sentence sort of deals again with parallelism. And if you looked at some of the information in that syntax chapter in your textbook, it gives you a little bit more information about parallelism, which you probably want to pay close attention to as we lead up to the first quiz. It says, we are neither interested in buying a vacuum cleaner or do we want to use your carpet cleaning service. Usually when you use these, what they call correlating conjunctions, if you use neither, you need to not use or, but you need to use nor. If this was either, then the or would work. So be careful because in your textbook, it does give you a list of these that you probably want to condense to memory. So when you're writing your essays throughout the semester and when you're studying for this first quiz, you know what to look for if you're using the wrong correlating conjunction in this case. All right, so quiz 1 practice, and again, this is optional. This will be beneficial, especially if you think you need a little bit more practice with comma splices, run-ons, appositives, faulty parallelism, and fragments. So if you review and complete exercise 5 on pages 206, 207, and 208 in your textbook, that would be good practice. That would act as a really good study guide for the first quiz. Also, you might want to look at exercise 9, 10, 11, and 12 on pages 1212, 1213, and 1214, also in your textbook. A lot of these exercises are only, less than 10 questions. If you really know what you're doing, you could probably breeze through them quickly. If you want to sort of take your time and go through them and then, send me your answers so I can check them just to make sure that you will do really well on the first quiz in a couple weeks, then please email me your answers. I want to be able to help you as much as I can, where I can, and when I can. So as it relates for the grammar, really for week 1 and a good bit of week 2, that's probably pretty much it right now in a nutshell. Just sort of review those pages in your textbook, look at some of these exercises, attempt your hand at some of these exercises. If you need additional exercises, always go to Google and, just type in comma splice exercises with answers. So that way you can check your answers if need be. Or you can look up interactive quizzes that will pretty much give you feedback after you complete those online. So you do have a couple different ways that you can go about getting more practice with these grammatical concepts over the next couple weeks. And I believe the first quiz, grammatical quiz is going to either happen in week 3 or week 4. I believe it's probably week 4. You have to double check your assignment checklist and your syllabus for that exact date. But you do have a little bit of time as it relates to practicing and really getting a good handle over these grammatical concepts before you have to actually take that first quiz. I hope this was helpful. I hope you have a great rest of the week. I hope really the first 3 days of the semester, if you're new, I'm sure it's probably kind of overwhelming, especially if most of your classes are online. Remember to breathe. Take each class a little bit at a time. Work a little bit each day on each class. That way you can avoid getting, being late on an assignment. Avoid a lot of unnecessary stress that most of us don't need in a stressful life as it is already with everything else going on. And always reach out, reach out to your instructors when you know that you are having issues. Because a lot of us can help you when we know there's a problem early on. Then if you wait until after something that we've already graded and you didn't do so well on it, sometimes that's past the point, right? So please reach out. If you need any assistance with anything on Blackboard, if you need help with your rough drafts, if you need help with your grammatical practices, whatever the case may be. That's why we're here. We want to help you. We want you to do the best that you possibly can in each class. But simply, we can't read minds. We don't try to read minds. So if you are struggling, you definitely need to ask for the help. All right, so we will end it there. And I hope everybody has a great Wednesday. See you next time.